I think this is an amazing film and really interesting. I think it's politically bullshit.
Oh, yes, of course, because there's a bunch of closed-minded racist morons that represent people in the seats of power.
So this is part of that conversation of like the imagined American working class that we've been doing for decades now.
These are Bollywood musicals. They just don't have dance numbers because Hollywood doesn't have the balls to just, put in a dance number. And if you can direct an action sequence, you can direct a dance sequence.
It's 5 fucking stars. It's absolutely unbelievably beautiful and amazing. And it is total propaganda for the Cuban Revolution. I don't think anymore that you can avoid fighting inside and outside of the state at the same time. I think there may be multiple ways to do that. I don't think electoral politics is the only way to do that.
Yeah, but some shit's got to get burned down too, so...
Right.
Honestly, it kind of warms my heart that somebody out there was thinking that the Watermelon Woman was a threat to like white, hetero, cis Christian culture.
I know we're saying that this isn't technically like a good movie, but a movie with surprisingly good elements and a really fucked up package.
This ending, you have good characters that are entirely powerless against the unstoppable evil capitalists.
Mm-hmm. Only after Avengers did Marvel movies start doing as well as Ghost.
Right.
Starring Patrick Swayze, Demi Moore, and some very phallic clay.
Did the word pornography ever enter your mind when you were watching this film, Isaac?
Nope.
And I think it has the politics of cinema stamp of approval. If you want to use this as a first date movie, go for it.
It seemed to have worked out for my folks. Fuck capitalism. Fuck all of this stuff.
Welcome one, welcome all to the Politics of Cinema. On this show, we believe films are never neutral. There's a political as well as an artistic message captured in every film, in every country, and in every time period. We're on the lookout for all of it here, and my name is Aaron Spears.
And my name is Isaac Miller. And on this episode, we are going to be looking at a contemporary film, extremely contemporary film, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which is, technically 2022, but is really 2023. That's when it's been released. I saw it, that's when you could see it in theaters. From director and co-writer Daniel Goldhaber. This is, to be honest, kind of atoning for our May Day episode.
My bad. I picked that one this year, and sometimes you think it's going to hit the themes you want, and sometimes it doesn't hit the themes you want. But
right,
nonetheless, listen to that episode. An interesting film, to be sure, but wasn't exactly what we were looking for in celebrating our leftist brothers and sisters out there and workers out there in the world in general.
This is pretty fucking unambiguous. Not a problem.
It is. I like it when just even in the title, you're like, okay, I know what we're in for.
Yes. Well, but here's the thing. There's a lot of, there's other movies that deal with these sorts of themes, or there's a very few, but there's a few. And this, how do we put, I'm just going to, spoilers. This is for blowing up pipelines. This film is unambiguous. There is no, maybe, the ends will, the ends will unjustify your means. There's no, basically usually what Hollywood does this sort of thing. And I hate saying Hollywood. People say, oh, Hollywood does this. It's like, we can get into a little more detail about who's doing this. Right.
Because people use the word Hollywood just to mean like a movie was made. Like this movie was not made in Hollywood.
Yeah, this is not a Hollywood movie. Well, but they use it to mean, a movie was made.
Right.
What they really, part of the problem with it actually is that that's not actually what's happening. Right. So like they mean this sort of mass, this thing where they anthropomorphize Hollywood.
Oh, wait, I didn't know you were going this route. What do you mean?
In the sense that they treat Hollywood as like a decision-making entity, a singular decision-making entity, which is the film industry. And the film industry decided to do this or decided to do that. You're not even dealing with multiple studios, writers, executives, all the complicated ways that decisions are made, which admittedly is at this point maybe more homogenizing and dead-eyed than it's ever been, frankly.
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, Hollywood, the American film industry is in crisis and really does need a save. But this is not that at all. So I mean, I've seen these comments where it's like, well, Hollywood decided to no, no, no. But this is also not in any way the Hollywood version of this, in the sense that, when liberals write movies, they fucking dodge when it comes to this stuff.
Right. See our no, it's not Hollywood though. Shoot, I was going to say our review of Nomadland from a couple years back. We did that episode.
But
That's not really Hollywood either.
yeah, but I don't know. I don't know Chloe Zhao's politics, but they don't seem necessarily like radical necessarily. I mean, I
And that
don't
doesn't mean
want
it's
to.
a bad movie. See our episode about that one. Just
Yeah,
the
but see the first episode of this podcast for this discussion. See our Children of Men episode, because
indeed.
the inability of oftentimes liberal critics to understand leftist films, which, here's the thing, doesn't have to be the case. There are more liberals than there used to be, because, at least in the American context, because of sort of the rise of the increase in the socialist left, there's more awareness of just left positions being a thing that exists.
Right.
People, you get familiar with it. We see more of this. I mean, if you're in New York, I mean, DSA, for instance, is massive, right? And there's all sorts of other stuff going on as well. So, or other places, things. I mean, I say New York just because that's where everybody who writes things is. New York or LA, in our you know deeply uneven cultural landscape. Not so much in, let's say, actual cultural production. I mean, obviously, yes, those are centers of cultural production, but also in where you can be heard for cultural production. But yeah, this is a fucking leftist movie.
From outside the Hollywood system.
Without From outside the Hollywood system, but in a way that, how many American movies have we covered that are actually leftist movies? Reds?
Oh shoot! I need our whole say filmography, our whole episode list in front of me.
There
Hollywood
are,
movies, actual leftist one. Yeah, I mean we've done. See our feed. I don't know. There's some in there.
but it's not common. I mean, certainly themes can be. I mean, so I'd say see our first episode on Children of Men, which I think is a movie, is one of the rare movies where an activist milieu is actually presented in a way that seems to actually know what's going on. This is a movie where, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, I don't think this is actually how you would organize this sort of action. And people involved in that sort of thing would probably, no, this isn't really how you would do this. I'm not going to speak to that. I've also never been involved in this sort of direct action personally,
Well, it's also I don't think this film is trying to be a manual, as the title implies, for how to blow up a pipeline.
any more than the book that it's named after. It's
Right.
not.
I mean, I think it is more so than the book it's named after, but I don't think it's trying to be like this is how you find like-minded people. Like it's not a how to proceed. It's not a procedural film, even though it is kind of a procedural film, and that it's almost like a reversed heist film.
Yeah, it's a
Structure.
reverse heist thriller. But I think part of what it's doing is, I mean, it is making an argument, and it's
Right.
it's also, I think, creating it is creating, I don't want to say a Hollywood movie, but it is creating a how do I put this? Like, it's creating a heroic story that shows this position, right? And shows these sorts of people,
Right.
and why they're, it, part of it is bringing together people who've been affected by capitalism's destruction of the earth in its racialized and very much classed dimensions, who suffers from this and why. It's bringing them all it's showing, you know ideologically showing why this is happening, and showing these people, and humanizing the people doing this, activists sort of doing this sort of thing.
Right.
I don't know, it's doing a lot of political work as a movie in an effective way.
In which it almost never to me feels like, and I'm part of the choir here on this particular film, like it's not preaching to the choir. It doesn't feel preachy at all
Right.
to me, which is really interesting. Even when they're having like a few conversations that touch on what could be preachy topics, it's done in a way that is more conversationally driven and isn't a lengthy scene the way you get. Like one of the scenes I kept thinking of was Richard Linklater, director I adore, did a movie called Fast Food Nation based on the book of the same name, also a fictional film based on a nonfiction book. And there are really pretentious scenes of college kids sitting around, including, I think, Avril Lavigne in one of the scenes, talking about how they need to do revenge on concentrated feedlots for cattle. And then they go out and do something about it. But like, there's these speechifying scenes the way you get in a Richard Linklater movie that are dialogue heavy with great philosophical topics and blah, blah, blah. And you get touches of that here, but it's intermixed in such a way that it's not preachy. And it's very effective in its messaging, I think, because it isn't just like, oh, here comes like a leftist speech now
Right.
kind of way. It's very organic to the plot. Also, the way you're describing the characters, which we'll get into, one of the things I adored about this movie was it really frames what's happening to these characters as violence is already inherent in the system, and it's already violence is happening to these characters, and they're responding in kind with an act of quote unquote violence. And we'll get into the quotes eventually, but
The violence that they have faced are ones that destroy their livelihoods and destroy their lives.
right.
And one of the things that the movie doesn't shy away from is if you disrupt oil production, you're going to hurt a lot of people.
Right.
And they deal with the consequences of that. They don't run away from that contradiction, but they're presenting the daily life of cancer, of destruction of livelihoods and destruction of ways of life, of violence as something that needs to be defended against, and that we're not defending against, that we're not fighting back against, and that has to that this is that it's taking seriously why this is justified.
Correct. And even as we do the characters too, some of them that are taking quote unquote action against, I'm going to stop doing quotes. There are some folks in this movie who are taking action in their eyes against these ills and against these problems and against the violence that's already being visited upon their lives. But it's in the traditional nonviolent, let's change the system from within, let's gather some signatures and let's get divestment on campus and blah, stuff that is important, but they're like, this is not what I want. I want something more effective. I want to take it to the next step here. What do we do beyond like these nonviolent approaches we've been using that, what, it's a red alarm emergency. These aren't what we need to do anymore. We need to do stuff now, or we
Right.
need to do stuff 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's too late.
Right. I mean, that's just it. Is part of it is that this creates, if I remember correct, I mean, the underlying strategy, this does create space for those movements to operate. I mean, part of it is what they're saying is by disrupting and making oil not, making basically creating a cost for maintaining this oil economy and oil structures, they're also creating space for those giving leverage to those movements. Because
Right.
part of the reason this stuff isn't effective is because you don't have enough power to actually disrupt. So having a wing of the movement that is willing to cause serious economic damage,
Yeah.
motivates transition.
Right. It's not, these aren't disparate actions being taken. It's a multi-pronged approach where is the damage to infrastructure approach to fighting for environmental justice and a planet that everybody can continue to live on.
Yeah. I mean, the existentialness of this is
it's there.
So should we actually talk about the movie? Because no, we've talked about the movie, but part of what I like is that we've just launched into like themes and politics of it, because I think it's pleasurable. There's many leftist movies that we could cover on this podcast, but it is pleasurable to watch one that is kind of American, frankly.
Yeah, in a weird, yeah.
Because it doesn't happen. I mean, Sorry to Bother You is the last one I can think of.
Yeah, I was trying to think. I was like, well, there's a couple. Well, there's yeah, but so this one, we've complained, we bitched and moaned on several episodes about like the one sentence synopsis or the letterbox synopsis or IMDb has this. You're like, that's not a great encapsulation of this film. This one couldn't be more like bullseye, man. A crew of young environmentalist activists execute a daring mission to sabotage an oil pipeline. Clean, quick, effective, exactly what this movie is. And some of the themes you're already touching on are mentioned even in the tagline for the movie, which the tagline is, "This is an act of self-defense," which is also the final line of the film, if I remember correctly as well.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Boom Talk. Today, teaching myself to make a homemade blasting cap. And if this works, it'll be step one in making our own improvised explosive.
Might be headed to Texas for the winter.
What's in Texas?
Just a project.
What kind of project?
Try to stop the pipeline from being built on my property. Poisons the air, water.
Damn, this place is sick. You guys cooking meth in here?
You ready to start working?
We have to show how vulnerable the oil industry is by hitting something big.
Michael, what do you think the odds are we blow ourselves up?
I don't really care.
We could blow the pipe at the hilltop, keep the oil from leaking.
You're not actually thinking.
I'm not thinking about it. I'm doing it.
What if y'all do structural damage?
Structural damage is kind of the point.
This is destruction of federal property. Terrorism.
American empire calls us terrorists, then we're doing something right.
If you're seeing this, let those who profit from mass death know their properties will be trashed.
3, 2, 1.
They will defame us and claim this was violence or vandalism. But this was justified. This was an act of self-defense.
We've got one of those, honestly, kind of like late 90s, early 2000s style narratives where it's a ensemble piece of character work here, and we slowly get to know all of the different characters and how their storylines overlap, intersect, and play off of each other.
Well, this is a thriller, so part of it is by dribbing and drabbing out information about each one, as well as creating, and we're going to spoil pretty heavily here because it's really important, and it's also part of the political messaging of the movie. Basically, you have people from disparate backgrounds. We have fed up indigenous youth. We have people of color who've been literally poisoned by environmental, basically by having the fact that factories are going to be in their neighborhoods, not in others.
Yeah, it was their neighbor. It's like across the street.
You have sort of anarcho. I don't think they're really crust punks, really, but they're like, the type, but like they're a couple, and they're like exactly the demographics, because one is functionally a trust fund kid, and the other one is like someone who is like comes from an incredible. The woman comes from an incredibly poor background in which she has nowhere to turn, and the guy is like a trust fund kid, and that is almost exactly demographics.
Oh, 100%. It's as I was watching them even play out, I was like, oh my God, I used to skate with kids like this. Or I know 3 kids that were trying to run like a little zine publication, organization that they were kind of like half crust punk, because they were also like kind of got into rave culture in the 90s at the same time. So yeah, no, those two seemed very, I was like, oh, I know you two.
Yeah, no, and this is, it's a type. I think I've had comrades where it's like, yeah, it's very much like this balance of like people who, are absolutely desperate and people who are desperate to get out of their lives.
Right, and also played in this movie almost as kind of like they are clearly very endeared to the cause and are committed, but also have kind of like a thrill seeker element to it.
Right.
Which is fine. Like, it's a thrilling thing to try to go do what they're doing in this movie. And I like that was represented within some of the characters.
But adds to the tension, because there are these people you can ideologically trust at all. And that is part of the thrill.
Correct. And also, are they going to keep up their end of the plan, too? Like, they're kind of the element of chaos in this plan.
Well, and we'll get into this moment, but also it involves the cops.
Right.
And then, I think sort of the heart of the movie is like, the relationship between Theo and Alicia, where, one of them has gotten out of the neighborhood and gone to college and got involved in environmental activism and realized the absolute limits of this, right? Mm-hmm. Politically, that this is not what they're doing, is at best doing glacial speed, like, I don't know, types of like eco-capitalism and that's not going to do it. And then her girlfriend, who is dying from
leukemia.
Yeah. Basically induced by, the neighborhood they lived in.
Right. Yeah. The factory that was their neighbor just spewing filth out for a generation or more.
So, I mean, she's sort of she and her, comrade, who she also sort of peels off from their sort of college stuff. I mean, she drops out of school, and yeah, her comrade Sean, who she sort of, drags off from this, are sort of the catalyst for this, where they're sort of gathering people basically sort of from online clandestinely. Nobody knows anybody else, but also they're very compartmentalized. There's a security, there is a sense of security culture. This is, once again, not, I've never planned anything like this, but I don't imagine it's how you'd actually do it. But that's not really the point.
I would imagine people are doing it. It's just maybe not that good operational security to do it in an online environment. I don't know. People still organize January 6th online too, so who knows?
Well, but January 6th, the right gets to do things.
Well, okay, separate, topic there and other problems, but it's also one of those that the movie doesn't go into the nitty gritty like details, like the procedural of like how they connected and what board they used or what they did this or that. Because one of the indigenous characters, Michael, he's on a North Dakota reservation. He's just starting to post videos about how to make bombs and blow shit up. Like you can find that everywhere on TikTok and Reddit and YouTube. Like it is not hard to find people blowing shit up. It's the element
Yeah.
of, they find this guy, then put him into their fold. And it's not like, well, how did they connect? Did they actually talk about what they were going to do online before? Because also a huge spoiler alert to the movie as well, which again, okay, last time I'm going to mention spoiler alerts here.
But basically, past this point, if you've not seen the movie, do not listen, because this is a thriller and we're going to be talking about the elements that make the tension work, and they are not things that are obvious. So please, usually I don't go this adamantly. I don't care about spoilers, but the structure of, films are designed to manipulate us, and the structure of this film demands, like,
Right. If you want the thrills, then
yeah,
don't hear about the thrills before you get to go experience the thrills, ideally. But
yes.
But I think, so part of the nature of how did they all connect? Is this actually how you would conduct operational security if you're doing this clandestine, how to blow up a pipeline plan of direct action? It partly doesn't matter because the film isn't concerned with like every single connection and what kind of traces they left. But also at the same time, they are planning to get caught. So it kind of doesn't necessarily matter. Granted, only certain ones are trying to get caught and certain people are trying to stay innocent and, unconnected or whatever. So I did have that hang up the first time watching it, going like, oh, were they very careful? Did they delete their history? But also the film isn't really bogged down in those elements of how to put the crew together in order to blow up a pipeline.
So we should also, so part of it is we've sort of mentioned various elements. You also have, they're doing this in rural Texas around a pipeline. So they also, the other sort of demographic represented here is your sort of white working class rural Texas guy, quite religious, with a lot of skills, also, who's lost his farm
to eminent domain for a pipeline,
right?
Yeah.
And who is in on this, who, he would be the odd duck out, but he actually fits in because they all have a purpose in doing this, and they've all suffered from it.
I thought it was fascinating to include this character for a whole host of reasons, and I wasn't quite expecting it, and we'll mention the book that it's based on at some point here, but having all these fictional characters around the story that is somewhat approached in the book, but not 100%. I was really not amazed. I was really fascinated when this character Dwayne was introduced because, well, I've already just sort of referenced it once. It seems like a character who could very easily fall into like the Trump cult and been at the Capitol on January 6th. But instead, he's stuck with like his family and his faith and the land and the generations that have worked the land that he is on, and how deeply he connected with Michael, who is the indigenous character from North Dakota that clearly has a reverence for the land that has been taken from him and his family and his tribe and his community up there in North Dakota, that those two find such intense common ground. I was like, well, yeah, duh, you would.
Yes.
And that's not really part of the general shitty political two-party political debate that you get within the United States. Well, and I found it to be really refreshing and kind of interesting. And also the fact that Dwayne kind of pulls himself out of certain conversations or certain things that happen throughout the course of the plot of the movie when he's just not feeling it. And he's like, yeah, I'm here for a bigger purpose with all of you, but I'm not really part of this debate right now about how are we terrorists or not or whatever. So I just thought that was a really fascinating character to have in a universe here of all of them are really fascinating characters. I was really glad that this type of character was actually in the movie.
And I think it's sort of expertly done. I mean, the other sort of tension filled people in the movie, which like, I mean, so part of it, so as the spoiler is the plan all along is to get caught and to use that, politically, right?
Right.
To use that as an opportunity. The other part about this is Rowan and Logan, who we mentioned before. This is our sort of not crust punks, but like
it's good shorthand for them, I think.
Anarcho, semi-anarcho party kids. But basically, the issue with Rowan is that they were involved in another act of sabotage, and Rowan got caught.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're doing, this is a very familiar scenario. I know people who have dealt with things like this, where basically, the deal is you squeal on people or we will hit you with maximum charges.
Right.
So they're part of what's going on is that, it looks like through most of the movie that they're untrustworthy, that they don't really believe in this. And that at the very least for her, she's collaborating with the cops because she's radioing with them throughout the plot.
Well, not quite radioing, but she has a flip phone
Yeah.
that she's sending texts and pictures of to document what's going on. You're like, oh shit. Like, which honestly really drove me nuts watching this because I was like, I hate that mole inside the organization trope within spy movies and that, which like this one, I was like, and again, probably because I was like very much cheering for the protagonist in this movie, that I was like, oh, I don't want this storyline here. Like, it's such a great movie. Like, what do we do with this storyline?
Except they do something with the storyline.
Exactly.
So part of it is, in a certain sense, this is almost a power fantasy for activists because of the long history of organizations being destroyed by infiltration, by this sort of manipulation.
Yeah.
The use of blackmail, the use of various types of coercive tactics to then undermine movements and so forth, and destroy them from within. This is like a standard tactic.
Which, I mean, from a film world perspective, we just saw that with Judas and the Black Messiah a couple years ago.
Right. That's
the focus is on the mole itself, and I was like, oh, there's so much. Like, there's another story here I want to see.
We talked about that movie at the time, didn't we?
A little bit. I know we did like a whole episode on it, but it was mentioned. But
God, that the movie. Here's the thing: is that's actually, I take it back. That's the other leftist movie in recent years. I would consider that a leftist movie. It certainly presents its politics pretty openly.
Right.
I mean, I guess I would consider it a leftist movie, but it's a tragic one because you have an incredible opportunity. Cut off the entire part about the informer, and you have like one of the most amazing political movies.
Yes.
American political movies ever. And that decision, but it's exactly that kind of punt in a certain sense. It's like we have to dilute somehow. It's like, no, just make a movie about Fred Hampton, one of the greatest, one of the most inspiring left organizers and, black radical organizers this country has ever seen. Just fucking do it.
That's enough.
You don't need more. Anyway. So part of it is there's this tension throughout the whole movie, and I agree with you. And also, it's tropey to have it be these people. Oh, it's the sloppy white kids who actually really give a shit about it and are just going to sell out. And then, as their information about them dribs and drabs in, where this is why they're doing it, and so now we understand the tension, or why she's doing it, at least why the tension is there.
Right.
And then the reveal at the end, which is it was all part of the plan. Not all of it. Her being caught and everything was not part of the plan, but she had informed, she had informed Theo, and actually this had been incorporated into the plan so that her informing could get her off the off of the hook, but at the same time actually serve the broader purpose of their goals.
Right. In the end, you have two childhood friends, one who is dying of leukemia from being poisoned by the factory in their neighborhood, and the other childhood friend whose mom just died from being poisoned by the factory in their neighborhood, as an act of like, hey, we're a sympathetic face to have to take out a pipeline here in which no one is actually killed and property destruction is not violence, but they're creating they're creating a narrative to play out in the press and in the courts. Once two of them are caught, it's not we're all going to get away with this. It's going to be like it's going to look like these two people just did the whole thing themselves, and they're willing to take the blame for it, and they're prepped for what's going to be the fallout, which we don't see, but they have planned the whole operation, including the fallout as well.
Yeah, I should have said that's actually part of what's going on is, yeah, when we're sort of talking through what the plan is, the creating space for movements is you've created poster children who have lost loved ones and are literally dying from this and are willing, yeah, you could not have a more sympathetic
From media terms, because all of them are sympathetic from a human point of view. I'm sure you watching it, I watching it. I was like, I'm on the side of every single one of these characters, but from a way you can tell the media narrative is going to play out, they picked the two most like empathetic people you could have.
What I love about this is a Hollywood movie. This is a Hollywood ending, but it's a leftist Hollywood ending. I'm not saying it's unrealistic or anything like that. I mean, it kind of is, but what it is like, this is, we get our happy ending where the feds are thwarted, and we have, I mean, sure, the world is still being destroyed, but we get our happy ending, where the feds are thwarted, and we
and 6 of the 8 people get away with it, and the 2 people that don't have a plan.
It was all part of the plan, and it's all moving things forward, and then we see other people copying. So like V for Vendetta style kind of. And so like it's, yeah, like, and you know what? That's great. We deserve that. There's nothing wrong with that. The ending is earned structurally within the film, but also like, yeah, fuck yeah. Sometimes we win.
Indeed.
Can you tell that we are, I mean, so part of it is, I think the structure really works. I think it builds tension really well. I think this is a really well made movie.
Oh, 100%. One, it had me in the fact that it was shot on 16 millimeter film.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, right through the heart. I was ready to go. You can tell, I think, when you're watching it, it gives it a very visceral, it's mostly all handheld camera work. It places you right there with every single character from the opening shots up to the closing shots. There's a flashback structure that's employed that if I knew about it ahead of time, I would have been rolling my eyes because like, oh God, we're doing flashbacks to show how everybody got here. But they are the most efficient and succinct flashbacks I've seen, and they even come at just the right moments where like, an explosion accidentally goes off while Michael, the amateur demolition expert, explosion goes off and there's like a hard cut right back to see like how he got there. And you're like, okay, this is why he is okay and wasn't injured in this explosion. Like the sprinkling in of flashbacks takes you out of like a moment where you're like, no, I wanted more. And we'll get back to that. But it's clearly done at a specific moment where, okay, at this point you need to know this about this character. Boom. Here's the flashback.
Information is economized and dribbed and dragged out in just the right way.
Right.
And I mean, we've talked about all these characters, I haven't named everybody, but all of them are compelling, flawed, interesting people. And the political debates. So here's the thing. This is a left film. It eschews any open, like, anarchist, socialist, communist ideologies openly.
Sure.
Which, is here or there, but like, I think there's the ideology is up in front in action as opposed to, but they do debate their way through the consequences of their actions. I said this earlier, but one of the things I appreciate is property damage is not violence.
Right.
And if it is, then it's fine. But by destroying critical infrastructure for energy, you're raising energy prices, which does hurt millions of regular people. Right. And they are aware of this. It is not something without consequence, but it is something that is necessary under the circumstances.
Right.
And so not shying away from that makes this a much more politically mature movie.
That's a good way to put it. Because it's not like they go round and round about whether we should or where we shouldn't. I really like the fact that by the time we're meeting all these characters, they're like, it's time for this.
Right.
It's time to do this specific type of action.
Right.
And as they go, I love that there weren't even like, oh, should we or should, like, they are committed already. It's more just sort of the follow through of like, hey, at one point they say they're going to stay like clean and sober, but they actually have one night where they all kind of like have some drinks together and, you know,
Get
kind
high.
of the pressure valve is released a little bit. Fine. Absolutely. Go ahead.
Mm.
And there's a talk about like, are we going to be called terrorists? Well, yeah, we are going to be called terrorists. You know who else was a terrorist? Like Martin Luther King Jr. Like, I think one character even was just like, Jesus was a terrorist. And I think that's the point where Dwayne just like, I'm going to go camp out under the stars in my pickup truck or whatever, because it's a bit too much for him and his character, which feels very true. And also it has that ring to me of just like, oh, this is one of those like late night college debates I had, 15 years ago or whatever. But they're talking it through and they don't belabor the point though. They just, it's maybe like a minute and a half, 2 minute scene and we're on to the next thing. But it's conversations that these people are having because of the spaces that they're in and the actions that they're taking.
Yeah, it's and that sort of discussion is like both a decent political discussion, but it's exactly one that like sort of college students having when they're not like, I don't know. It's like, yeah, I mean, this isn't. You were pointing out there's no like political diatribes exactly,
right?
But it's also like to a certain degree, there's a political maturity to this movie, but it's also like by not directly dealing with the ideologies that actually a lot of these people would tend to have. Like, yes, this is like this sort of like, yes, well, the Martin Luther King would have, and it's like, yeah, indeed, there isn't like they don't, by avoiding that to a certain degree, you're also like not going into sort of the the kind of deeper discussions that people would have about these sorts of actions historically, because it's like these are like very accessible examples that they're using.
Right, absolutely. And I think what would happen is like the conversations that aren't in this film, well, one, they are in the book. So if you're intrigued by this and you haven't read the book, you'll go read the book. But also, like if you and I were able to see this movie together, or if you see it with other friends of yours and you watch it, you'll have these discussions around the film. It doesn't need to be necessarily in the film in order to inspire that type of conversation. Like you said, it's the movie that shows and doesn't just tell you.
Right. It actually shows and doesn't.
Right.
Wow. I hear that that's important in filmmaking.
It seems like it is too. Also, the score grabbed me in this movie. Like I was saying, in my head, it's kind of a reverse heist film, and you're cheering for them to like, blow up the pipeline because that's what we're here to watch them do, and this is what we're here to cheer them on for. The way that you're here to cheer on like the Ocean's crew rob a casino or, pull off some sort of heist in a Soderbergh film. Actually, and I'm saying that out loud, this movie feels like some early 2000s Soderbergh, like Traffic almost, like the way he always uses like handheld camera and slowly ratchets up tension and whatnot. Anyway, it has this propulsive score that I have listened to probably like 20 or 30. I just kept putting it on in the background when I was like cleaning or driving or anything. It's like a lot of percussion and electronic music kind of folded in to just create this really fascinating mood that goes through the entire film and kind of just ratchets up the tension slowly and slowly and slowly in each and every scene. And are they going to be able to pull this thing off?
Yeah.
I just like to shout out scores because I don't know music too well, but this one really stood out to me, especially seeing it in the theater. You get a great sound system. I mean, the place was just pulsing. Granted, it was like me and two other people when I saw it. But the other aspect we need to discuss is got to be the book the movie is based on.
Yes.
Which is pretty interesting to get well, actually, I referenced it earlier, but like the way, Richard Linklater adapted a nonfiction book, Fast Food Nation, to be a fictional narrative. There were narratives in that book that he was able to just fictionalize as a screenplay. In this particular case, you've got a book by Andreas Malm, same title, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, that is a nonfiction book, but contains none of these characters. And in fact, has 3 different sections that it goes through: learning from past struggles, breaking the spell, and fighting despair. And as actually kind of joked in the movie, does not teach you how to blow up a pipeline if you read the book, but
no,
makes a pretty cogent and interesting argument that sabotage is a logical form of climate activism, given the code red emergency that we are all currently living through. So how do you adapt that into a fictional film?
You adapt the process by which people come to the conclusions of the book, right?
Right.
So you show the logic of the book through the film. I think it's actually a kind of brilliant way to do this. Andreas Malm Anders Malm is a Swedish Marxist. He's sort of, I mean, I think this is probably his biggest, but he's quite well known. I think he had a book before this, but his big opener, certainly for sort of Marxist intellectuals, and also is in a scholarly sense, is a book called Fossil Capital, the Rise of Steam Power and the Roots of and the Roots of Global Warming, which basically retells the rise of basically the choice of fossil fuels over water power during the Industrial Revolution in Britain, and basically points out that water power at the time was more efficient and more effective, but the choice of fossil fuels actually was because it was more effective for labor control. It allowed you to locate factories more at your will. And, various, I mean, it's a big book. And
versus like access to water. Yeah.
Right. So it actually, I mean, basically the adoption of fossil fuels, which mind you, once you get to steamships or something like this, like water power isn't necessarily going to do this, but like in terms of the Industrial Revolution, the choice of fossil fuels had to do with class struggle, in classic Marxist, sense.
Yeah.
So, and from there, he's put out a number of other sort of eco-Marxist texts, and it recently came out, with more, we could say, popular texts. But he's not simply like sort of an academic Marxist. When he talks about direct action, he's taken part for decades. He's a very experienced, radical militant with a lot of, sort of the full package. This text came out. There's a fair amount of controversy, even on the left, over like various debates about it. And I don't think necessarily, the issue of whether to blow up a pipeline. I think that, I mean, yes, there might be some people on the left who are against that, but I think broadly that's,
it's got to happen.
All right. But I think, there's some other conceptions in the text that sort of push some buttons. I don't really want to get into that particularly here. But, this is it shows us where we are, that this text by, I feel like not really since I'm going to say this, I hate saying this, 60s and 70s, would you have, I mean, this isn't a big movie. Not a lot of people are going to see it, but some people will. But basically, sort of like a radical intellectuals. I'm saying this. That's not true. I mean, there's always been a lot of radical intellectuals that have touched a lot of people. But for something like this, I think this is a sign of the times that we're in, that this book broke through in the way that it did.
I think so too. Well, there's a whole generation, and I think he even speaks about it. I mean, he does speak about it in the text and learning from past struggles, and what inspired him to write the book and really take a look at the state of climate activism right now. There's an entire generation below us and even below him who are coming of age and growing up in a world that they're like, this is on fire and is like an existential daily crisis that we need to deal with. And no one seems to be taking this seriously that's in charge right now.
Right.
And, as somebody who has like a 15 and 13-year-old, like it's a thing that should be like in your lives in general. And actually, as I read through the book, I was even telling my partner Kelly about how it's like, you know what? I feel like, maybe our retirement plan should be eco-terrorism. Because like once the kids are up and they're on their own and they're off and they're like functional as adults, like, oh, our role as parents are gone and we need to do something to make it a better place for them and future generations.
Well, let's not say that on podcasts.
Well, there's worse things said on podcasts, so I'm not too worried, but
yeah, no, but security culture and sort of, anyway, the point is, no, I mean, I'm serious, like, I mean, neither of us are involved in, I'm not really active these days, and neither of us are involved in anything, and there's no, whatever.
Isaac, you don't even have time for a weekly podcast anymore. There's no time in your schedule.
It's really I don't have time for anything I
But
want.
if, but if
Why did I do this?
but if you're going to like, it's so fascinating. Like you could even just be like inspired by this book as your screenplay credit, but the fact that you also want to call attention to the nonfiction text, I think, says something about the intentions of the filmmakers and the crew and the entire production of this film. Again, not made in Hollywood. The actual production companies are Chrono, Lyrical Media, and Spacemaker. I'm guessing those are production companies nobody listening to this has ever heard of before. This is not like Paramount Pictures bought the rights to this text and adapted. This is not a Hollywood pushing some sort of leftist agenda on anybody. This is an independent production that adapted a nonfiction book, which used very little of the actual text into the script of the movie, but is still credited as being, we're adapting this book
Well,
to your
I
movie.
mean that to be clear, like part of it is that there is no left Hollywood, right? There's
No.
liberal Hollywood, and the right likes to conflate these things.
Well, it's also a money making venture. So it may have liberal tendencies, but it's still about, is it making money?
Yes, no, exactly.
And if this was a surprise spring blockbuster, you would probably have maybe a new little like micro trend popping up in Hollywood films.
No, I have no idea what would happen if a movie like this was a surprise blockbuster. I actually, I have no idea what happens.
Well, some other smaller budgeted indie stuff would probably get some financing, and then
Right.
maybe that would snowball into something else. But who knows?
I think that would be the big one.
Right.
I have no, yeah, that would be there would be a deep ideological moment if this
Be interesting.
movie like made money.
Yeah. But I just mean the fact that it's still like it's officially an adapted screenplay, even though very little of this movie is in that book, is in the nonfiction book. I think says something about how they want the ideas within this film uh, stand strong, and if you're interested, like go read that book.
Right. Exactly.
So
I mean, I think
yeah.
that's directly what they want.
Well, I don't think we need to wrap up with is this a leftist film, but is this a leftist film?
Yes, it's a leftist film.
Oh my God, watch it, celebrate it, share it, get together watch parties. It's fantastic.
Yeah, no, we don't get stuff like this these days that much, frankly.
No, and we're watching for it. So
I mean,
if it was out there more often, we would be covering it.
yeah, I don't know. It's very, isn't it sort of, it's sort of relaxing to have like, yeah, no, we don't even really need to. This is just one of our movies, It just doesn't happen that.
Yeah.
We've actually never done a Sorry to Bother You episode.
Not yet, but that's one of those perennial, like in the works kind of episodes.
3 years ago, or whatever it's been, it was going to be part of our, Bay Area, Oakland,
Oh yeah.
Thing, which, honest to God, I still want to do that. I mean, we waited so long that the star of one of those movies has both risen and fallen. Oh, Jonathan Majors in Last Black Man in San Francisco.
He's fallen now? I didn't hear the fallen part.
Oh, Google him. It's rough out there.
He went like Hollywood and started doing like not Rambo sequels. What's he doing now? Rocky sequels. And I was like, I'm not interested anymore.
We have to talk about Creed. There's nothing wrong with Creed. That's not the thing. Is he's the main villain in the Marvel series. That's not Creed is not selling out.
Great. Anyway, back to celebrating this awesome leftist movie that we just watched and we were talking about. Well, the problem with Oakland and Sorry to Bother You was that turned into a larger project that we were talking about, like all these different movies and possibly like this whole movement that happened within the Oakland area and what's going on in Oakland. And that's going to take some digging in more than just like hitting record and talking about one particular movie.
Yeah, that's at this point, at the rate we're going, that's a summer series.
Yeah. A summer when you're not off immersed in a different language for 2 months.
Well, that's never going to happen again.
Yeah. So yeah, enthusiastic. Go watch How to Blow Up a Pipeline. At the point that this episode is out, it's now available on home media. Buy it, own it, support it, enjoy some of the extras that I'm sure on DVD and Blu-ray at this point, and share it widely. Host watch parties. It's a fun time. It's a thriller. Like it couldn't be packaged in a better way. It's this interesting kind of reversed heist thriller that will grab your attention from the moment it starts and hold you through to the end, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. And I don't know why I didn't give it 5 stars on Letterboxd. I'm still hanging out of that 4.5 star with a heart right now. I don't know what's wrong with it that I didn't just be like, it's perfect. What's wrong with it?
Honestly, I gave it 4, which is my superb rating. Because once I go past 4.5, it's like masterpiece, and if you go to 5, it's like perfect.
Right.
And I think it's absolutely superb, and you should go out and see it right now and enjoy it, and then figure out how you can make a difference in the world.
Absolutely. And since this is part of our summer series where you're hearing you're hearing Isaac right now speaking English, which he's not allowed to do at this point in time.
That sounds yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, I'm not actually allowed to speak English at this point.
It's a bit of a podcast time travel right now, but before we fully sign off, be sure to rate and review the show in whatever podcast app you are using. And if you do enjoy the show, tell a friend or two. And if you love the show, feel so inclined, we have a Patreon page set up. Just follow the links in the show notes to take you to all of the relevant spots there. And until next time, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Isaac, and I'm really running out of things to be safe from. I mean, there are a lot more things to be safe from, but it's like, be sure not to be hit by an awning that collapses or something. I don't know. But like in this particular case, I'd probably talked about all the, like the big ecological issues. But once again, we live in a dying world. If you look at like the collapse of, let's say, just animal life. And we live in a monoculture world, where sort of capitalist society turns everything into its own image in a very narrow sense. So I guess what I would say is you can't really stay safe from that. You can only destroy it. You can only destroy it and create something new and better. So there isn't really a choice now. You're in it whether you want to be or not. So let's do it.